Hey, women entrepreneurs, ready to turn your big ideas into reality? At CIBC, we believe in empowering women to lead, innovate, and thrive, and we're cheering you on every step of the way. Discover the CIBC Women Entrepreneurs Hub. Connect with inspiring mentors, swap stories with fellow entrepreneurs, and access resources made just for you. Because every business is unique, and you don't have to do it alone. Whether you're just starting out or taking your business to the next level, CIBC is here to support you. Visit cibc.com/womenentrepreneurs and find out how CIBC can help your business soar.
Welcome to the Startup Women podcast. Today's guest is Ashley Boyce, and I'm so excited to have her here. She is CEO of Zero Collective. She's also a luxury brand and marketing leader with nearly 2 decades of experience across beauty, fashion, and consumer goods. She holds a master's in global fashion management from the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City and has led major brand portfolios at Unilever across both Canadian and US markets. She later co-founded Noteworthy, a personalized DTC fragrance brand, scaling it from launch to over $12 million in US annual revenue. In 2025, Ashley joined Zero Collective as CEO, bringing deep expertise in luxury, brand building, and consumer experience to guide the company's national growth. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. On this show, we talk a lot about the pivotal moments inside of founders' businesses. And what I'm really excited about today's episode is we're going to focus more on career and the pivotal moments in your career, because even just from that bio alone, you've been all over the place in terms of experience. Yeah, you can definitely see the through line in the experience, but I think not everyone goes from corporate and major corporate to founder to CEO role. So I'm really excited to talk through all that. I'm really curious, when I was reading through your story, it made me think about my own story and growing up and thinking about, I always thought I would be a high-level executive at a business. I think for me, that was kind of what ambition looked like. I hadn't even considered being a founder. And I'm really curious for you, what were those childhood ambitions, and were you surprised by your path?
My mother tells a story of when she went into my JK class and she was looking at the wall where all the kids were meant to be putting out like what their ambitions were. So a lot of, at that age, children want to be firefighters, they want to be police officers, they want to be ballerinas, they maybe want to be doctors or nurses. What I said is I want to be the sparkliest girl in the world. Which I'm not sure I've achieved yet, but every part of my career, I think, has gotten me closer to sort of that ambition. But certainly as I got older in my career and I studied business in university, I always thought, and I had interned in an advertising agency after my second year, then I interned at Unilever after my third year, and then started with Unilever, and I was with them for 14 years after my fourth year. Always sort of thought that big CPG was the way that I wanted to go. And I had a particular passion for Unilever because I loved what the company has stood for and still stands for, which is really mission-driven brands. And you get that experience working on brands like Dove, brands like Degree, and Vaseline, and Schmidt's, and I spent a good amount of my career working on Axe. And so I always knew that that was sort of what I wanted to do. The level of, what I wanted that to look like, I think I always thought I wanted to stay in marketing. I will be honest that I think there was a point in my career where I said, well, I don't want to be a CEO. I just want to be a CMO. That changed for me, obviously, eventually, but that was sort of what I was envisioning. And so what was really interesting as I think about my sort of career pivot and what got me to think about moving just even first from like a large company to a startup, and then thinking about moving from being a player in a large company to being a founder in a startup, was really this idea of, what can you personally unlock? And what I loved about Unilever was I've had the most amazing training there, the most amazing mentors. I've had these really wonderful brand experiences, and I can, talk about the campaigns that have meant so much for me and the stories that I've heard. But there's always just a level of control that you lack when you work in a large organization, because a lot of people need to weigh in. A lot of people need to give feedback, and most decisions are not your own. What I loved about sort of moving to this like founder mentality, company mentality is there's just a lot less guardrails. And so decision making becomes pretty open. And that was just something for me that was like so exciting as I thought about moving from large CPG to something else, and really looking at myself to be like someone who I had always thought would be always in a big company to going, actually, maybe I could do this. Because I think that's the thing that, you know, I if you'd asked me 10 years ago, would I ever consider myself a founder, let alone, 20, 30, the answer would be no. But I now consider myself a founder. I consider myself a startup business executive. And I think that's something that has been really exciting for me as I look back on my career and think about how that's evolved.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a similar experience in corporate of feeling like I could move so fast, and then I just kept hitting all of these walls.
Absolutely.
And so I had a middle stepping ground of working for a startup, but I experienced that same feeling of, wow, I can go so fast now. We can make things happen. But then I got caught in the middle of I'm putting in the founder effort and I'm definitely not getting the founder result. So I had that extra stepping stone before feeling courageous enough to really say, let me try this on my own.
Yes, absolutely.
So 14 years at a company, for a lot of people, we call it golden handcuffs for a reason, right? It can feel very comfortable. I'm sure you were very good at your job at that point. You were probably extremely well respected in the role. What starts to change where you realize, okay, this might not be my forever?
So what was really interesting for me was I had worked in the US for a number of years. I'd worked for Unilever in Canada first before going there. Then I came back. I had my first son in Canada. He's 8 years old now. I went on mat leave, came back, worked in the Canadian business, getting to run, like $150 million worth of businesses as part of my experience. And it was really great. But when I came back from having my second son, who I had, what I joke about is like COVID Eve. He was born March 9th. So like we lived through COVID, but I was really lucky that I didn't have that, COVID birth experience. But I realized when I came back that maybe in a way I hadn't realized the growth for me was going to be limited and the career trajectory was going to be limited within the context of sort of how a lot of the big CPGs are building their businesses in Canada and for what I like to do. And I really want to be specific that it doesn't mean that there isn't growth to be had at any of these amazing companies. And I'm still a big admirer of Unilever and I loved my time there. But I realized the work that I wanted to do was probably not going to happen within the Canadian market at the scale that I wanted it to do. And so that's where maybe that sort of itch started coming in going, well, what else could I explore? And so, and especially because I really wanted to stay in Canada. I love having my children here. I'm very proud to be Canadian. My family's here. My husband has his job here. And so I really wanted to build a career that was here. And I started to realize that my best bet would be to start to look at a combination of what industries are really growing here, where are Canadian marketers being made, and how could I put myself in those shoes, because that was where I was going to get the right level of growth, and or doing something myself, which for a long time I'd never even considered, but that's where that sort of feeling and that itch started to come from. And what I will say is I don't think I'd realized until I'd actually left how much learning I could do outside of the organization. And so once I left, it's not that I realized I wasn't learning. I just realized that my learning growth rate was happening so much faster than it had been the past few years, and how much I really was invigorated by that level of learning of growth that I hadn't been getting the last few years of my career.
I really love when you mention the work that I want to do. I think so often we hear about the growth opportunities of what just titles and roles are looking ahead at our company. But for you to recognize, hey, there's still actually growth to be made here, but it's not in the work that I want to do. And I think that's something people should take note of and really think, what is the work I enjoy doing? I'm curious when you said, okay, I can explore going off on my own. I can explore different industries that are growing in Canada. Did you feel that fragrances and beauty was a growing space in Canada, or were you looking at totally different industries and then landed in fragrance?
Totally. So the first place I started was looking at like where are career opportunities growing in Canada, because actually that felt the safest rather than going to be an entrepreneur, which can feel very, very scary. And so I had landed on tech, and I did quite a bit of interviewing in the tech space. And, my, very naive learning was I did join a tech company, which is an amazing tech company, for a short amount of time. And I was like just amazed that there was no cost of goods. Because it's a SaaS business, which is so silly. But if you've worked your entire career where you are analyzing every single point of margin, to be beyond that and thinking much more about the growth trajectory and then the OpEx, it was just a totally different sort of frame of mind of thinking through of those things. So I started in that space, and then really like noteworthy in our D2C business was born out of a COVID conversation with my former co-founder where we were just catching up. And that's one thing that I think, in my personal opinion, was one of the few benefits of COVID was it became permissible to ask to just have a video call with someone.
Right.
Beforehand, it was like, if you can't meet with them in person, if you can't do this, like it was, we'll catch up when you're in New York or you're, traveling or whatever else. And so it came out of this conversation I had with my co-founder, who we were talking about the challenges that were existing in the beauty markets that we were operating in, because both of us are beauty operators, and how fragrance presents something really unique when it was both in COVID and in the digital space, which was, if I think about, digital as a supporting platform for a lot of beauty brands, fragrance for a long time had been left behind. So makeup at the time, and this was, 4 or 5 years ago, AR and augmented reality, where you could try on shades, where you could find something that would work, where you could try on full faces, hair color, where you could experiment with, what was your right color hair, like styles, all those were being served. Fragrance has historically been a really, really hard category to service in a digital way. It happens particularly with AI, which, when we were talking about it was 5 years ago, so very different than the AI of today. But AI was really servicing the commercial side of fragrance, meaning helping with the perfumers, helping the fragrance houses. And we just realized it was a neglected category in a time when D2C was booming. People were really looking for alternatives to shop fragrance. And even in, frankly, a store location, it's a really hard category to shop. You don't know where to start. Are you picking the pink bottle, the blue bottle, the one Keira Knightley endorses, the one, Britney Spears endorses, or, Justin Bieber? And you only have, if you're in a store, you only have a certain amount of space on your arms. You get olfactive fatigue. And so we started thinking about, ultimately, if this is a category people are really interested in, is there a problem that we could solve? And could we use new and emerging technology to solve it?
That's awesome. And I think, one of the challenges with fragrance online too is we smell it, right?
That's exactly right.
I was listening to Kris Jenner on a podcast recently talking about when Kim Kardashian launched a fragrance online. And again, it was such a neglected space because people were skipping over it of, well, we can't smell it online. So
Yes.
how are we going to communicate it? But we've watched years of TV commercials, right? Where it's a couple dancing in the moonlight and then just the name of the fragrance.
Driving off in a car or whatever else. There's all these, and there's beautiful storytelling associated with fragrance. And yet it tells you nothing about what the fragrance smells like. And then more importantly, nothing about what the fragrance smells like on you, which is, it's a very, very personal category.
So you get into building this business and you know that you have certain skill sets from this career that you've had and found a lot of success in, but now you're in a bit more of a driver's seat. I'm really curious, when we hear the after of somebody scaled from 0 to 12 million in annual revenue, do you feel going into that business you knew what you could make? Or was this something where you're like, okay, best case scenario, we can both be self-employed? Or did you know from the start, I can take this really big?
That's an incredibly great question. And I feel like there's both the concrete answer and the naive answer. Because if you've never started a business, you can never underestimate how hard it is. And I'll give you a little bit of a tidbit, which is I've done a lot of different Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinders, different professional tools. And one thing I found was I did StrengthsFinder when I was at Unilever, and then I did it again at Noteworthy and Proven. And the thing that actually fell off or changed in my top 5 strengths, which is what they identify, is I moved from being strategic to being an activator, which is really you move from being someone doing a lot of the thinking and actually not the doing to being I am the doer. And so to me, that was actually the really big fundamentally thing that changed when I went from a Unilever to a startup. But I think from the beginning, we always knew there was something really big in the idea we were building. The question was just how fast, at what scale, and at what, P&L and business model would make sense, because our business model was quite unique in the sense that we were really samples forward, because we knew that people wanted to try the fragrances, smell them on themselves, get to wear them at home before they would purchase, versus most fragrance companies are spend your $150 and then get a free sample on the side. And
Right.
so that was a lot of the sort of figuring out we wanted to do, which was we were always going to be dependent on how fast we could make the profitability of that model work.
That's so interesting. It's really taking the extra time to build the trust with the customer of
Yeah.
being able to try it out. It reminds me of Inkbox, another Canadian
Totally.
company.
And I love them. I love their business.
Yeah, because they would send out, I forget how many, but you could get like trial tattoos essentially. And
Totally.
it's one of those businesses where people go, well, how do I know if I like the fragrance smell? It's the same. How do I know if the tattoos will work? Well, here's some to try out.
Exactly.
And find
And we
yours.
knew people, we did a lot of research. So our initial consumer base that we went out to form both the data set that informed our personalized algorithm, which I could talk all about that sort of business model, was we talked to over 600 women. And like 73% of them said this was a very difficult category to shop. And when you hear that from the vast majority of women, you know there's a problem to be solved. And so if you can do it better than someone else, that's really your advantage. And I think my belief in every single business I have started, run, been a part of, is if you're not listening to your customer or your consumer or the person, in our business, our members who we're serving, you are not going to be successful.
So you were able to start Noteworthy with a little bit of a different setup than some founders. Before we get into that, I'd love to know, outside of the business, what was your support system like at the time? Did you feel like you had friends who had achieved success in these types of business? How much were you leaning on the other people outside of your co-founder?
It's so interesting that you asked that. So my support system, just on a personal level, is my husband and my 2 children, my wonderful family. But my family is like pure CPG. My mother is a CPA, a CA. So like nobody has an entrepreneurial bone in their body. Whereas my husband's family, lots of entrepreneurs. They were restaurant owners. My mother-in-law is an incredibly successful financial planner who helps women going through gray divorce and actually, frankly, put all levels of divorce, figure out how they plan their finances and have positive conversations with their partners, knowing that this is a really burgeoning space. So I had they were like, this is a neat side project, but not necessarily something that they were openly encouraging me to run off and do. I've had a number of really successful friends in the entrepreneurial space, but I think my frankly main support system is I have a really great business coach. I have really, really great even now, I was at the Toronto Female Founders meetup on Tuesday, and if you look hard, you can find these communities of people that are supporting you that are going through the same things. And I think that's what I would give to advice I would give to any entrepreneur, and frankly anybody at any stage of your career. You're going to have your core support system that might exist of your core friends, your family. It might exist of, for me, a professional coach. But finding people who you can ask the dumb questions to, who you could share your fears and your triumphs and your scary stuff, that's actually something that I think is underrated. And I think just the dynamic of going to men versus women, and this is obviously very, very generic, I think women experience a lot more trepidation and fear, and then feel very afraid to both talk about those things. And the more you can find community for people who can be your support system and can also say, I went through that and here's what I did. Or I didn't go through that, but I knew a person who did. I continue to be incredibly amazed by the group of female entrepreneurs and female founders that exist in Toronto and frankly in North America who are just willing to support each other. It's incredibly magical when you think about this idea of I'm not giving to get, I'm giving to give, and what that means for people. And so I live a lot of my ethos with, if I can be, I start almost all my calls with someone who is not involved in my business with, well, how can I be of service to you? Because if I can be of service to someone else, then I have done my job for that day.
So true. The women in business in Toronto are such connectors. The second
It's amazing.
You say what you do or what you're looking to do or a problem you're facing, have you met this person? Let me send an email right now. Or
Exactly.
Put you in a text thread.
I'm going to stop talking to you so I can do it. And
Yes.
it's it is incredible. And so I think that is something magical. It is a very Torontonian thing, but it's magical about women in general.
Yeah, and I think you have to seek it out. I think sometimes it can feel
Agreed.
like this thing of, it would be so much easier if I had other friends in business. You have to find them. I started in a very male dominated field of powerlifting. And so I had entrepreneur friends, but they were all guys. And I clocked it very quickly.
Very
and said,
different experience.
I need to find the women in business that I can lean on. And the early women I found 11 years ago are still some of my best friends and my first calls for a lot of the things I'm going through. But I very actively had to seek out those women, not just women, but women who align, women who have the same ambition, the same family values, because you also want to make sure you're taking wisdom from people who have similar desires as you. And
that's
values.
exactly right. And I think also like seeing the scales of what was really interesting is always seeing the scales of different businesses. So people that are in, call it a 5-figure business, a 6-figure business, a 7-figure, and like beyond, how you sort of also take advice from that group of people. But I think you're right. Like who you choose to be on your personal board and your personal group of advisors, like that actually really matters as you think about any part of your career, but it's particularly important as an entrepreneur because being an entrepreneur can feel more lonely than you would expect. It can be incredibly empowering, invigorating. You know, I meet every day with our members, and it's incredible to hear their feedback, and that's something that I would never have. I've never got that at Unilever. I never really got to have that one-to-one interaction, but it can also feel very isolating as you think about the thing that sits on you being an entrepreneur to build.
Mm-hmm. And I think so often when people are going to build their business, it feels this black and white of just, I have to start, I either go in alone or I go in with a co-founder. Noteworthy was built in kind of an interesting way. Can you take us a little bit behind the scenes of what it ended up looking like for you?
Yeah, so Noteworthy was built, off the side of our desks with myself and my co-founder, who we'd known each other from Unilever, and again, like I said, started with a quick, video chat in COVID, and we spent a year and a half, 2 years, every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. we got on what was often a 3-hour call, but just going through our ideas and, WhatsApping each other and getting excited. And like what was so energizing about that experience was not only building it with someone else, but was the positive feedback we kept getting. So it was like we knew, going back to your question, did you know it was going to be big? We had no specific, ambition. We were going to, at least I didn't. But we knew because we kept getting this positive feedback that there's something here. We're scratching at something. There's something so exciting.
Such a good feeling.
It was great. And then we actually, as we were looking to launch, we were sort of moved in and incubated by a different D2C company that I was, for the first few years working on Noteworthy, I was just running marketing for Noteworthy, and then I moved into running marketing for the entire personalized D2C platform. But it was great because we were all of a sudden surrounded, beyond just the two of us, with an incredibly capable group of people. And we were not the first priority because you go through to whatever the biggest part of the business is, but it meant we got scale through suppliers. It meant we had really, really great, amazing growth resources. It meant we had really amazing other people at the table to give us ideas. And so we're really lucky to sort of get to grow up in that sort of space and then figure out what was going to make our growth trajectory different or special versus the other sort of company in the portfolio. And that's where, I ended up spending the bulk of my time before I ended up moving and sort of running marketing for all of them.
And okay, I'm going to ask a hard question, I think, but if you could pinpoint one thing you feel like was the most impactful in what resulted in your team being able to move from 0 to 12 million, what do you feel like is the differentiator with your team versus another fragrance brand that couldn't do it? I know, I'm like, no, it's probably 1,000 different things.
No, it is and it isn't. So I think like there were a couple of things that we did that were really important to us. So we were never going to be holding ourselves true to just, this is the business model, we've created it, so it has to be this. So when we launched, we had our discovery kits were really core to our proposition. That was one thing we always said we would never get rid of. And then our full sizes. We started hearing really early, people wanted travel sizes too, because they were like, I don't want to commit to, 100 mils of fragrance. I want to get something that's a more manageable size, which is both the price point. And we would also hear that people are like, I just want to try it for another month and then I'll commit. And so very, very quickly, within 3 months, we launched travel sizes. Was it our idea of packaging? No. Did we get the volumes right? Absolutely not. But it was done. And we were like, we're going to get it out the door. Mm-hmm. So we were really, really quick to take customer feedback and say, what is the MVP that would be true to the brand that wasn't going to degrade the experience, but still address the customer issue? And I think like that's where a lot of businesses that look to scale really quickly, they try to be precious about a lot of those things. And we tried to be really, really careful about what we're going to be precious on. I think the other thing that we learned early on was how to recognize signals of something that was not working. And everybody gets burned by that. And so there's this delicate balance when you're really small of what analytics do you really need to have. And I will say on Xero, the company that I run now, one of my board members who happens to be Michael Ketchen, who's the CEO of Well Simple, he and I were talking about different analytics. And I said, well, I really want to dig into this. And his sort of advice was, it's probably statistically insignificant at your business size. So is that where you want to spend your time? And so what we started really trying to figure out is what level of scrutiny on Noteworthy and frankly on Xero today do we need to have on different things at scale to be making different decisions? Because building full analytics powerhouses when you are, sub 6 figures doesn't really make sense. And then thinking about where are your sources of data that are going to make your analytics powerhouses powerful and accurate, that I think is the other thing I learned early. And I come from a business like Unilever where everything we do is analytically driven because we have access to so much data and there's so much resource. And so that has always been really hard for me to let go of, and thinking through this balance of a gut decision versus a decision informed in information, and what level of information or data or statistics make sense for you to actually make a decision and then go forward on that.
I think with entrepreneurs of any size, they can get stuck on some entrepreneurs' biggest challenge is they get stuck on building the back end, right? We either have the entrepreneurs that have zero back end, or we have the ones that are, let me build the data analytics dashboard, look at all the custom things I'm building. So
how do I have all the tags
data
right? How do I totally.
They can see everything, but it's for 3 leads, right? Because they're not putting the effort
You're
into
exactly right.
building the business.
And I would say when I first started, I was just trying to even get a grip on, in Xero especially, what analytics I needed to look at. And so every day in my Slack, I get 5 pieces of information sent out. And that is just enough for me to know status of the business, where we're at, and then what changes I might need to make or be thinking about for the rest of the month if I think about the monthly leads we have or the monthly targets we have, and then how do we think about the annual and the quarterly plans we're building towards.
I think in the first point that you mentioned of what made the difference, it's adaptability, really.
Yes.
And I always say adaptability is not a sexy enough word that it hasn't had its moment, right? We've had vulnerability, authenticity, we've had all these growth buzzwords go to. But adaptability is so often at the root of being willing to pivot, being willing to quit something and not seeing quitting as a bad thing. And saying, hey, you know what? It wasn't our plan to do travel fragrances in the first 3 months, but if that's what we're hearing, that's what we're going to make, even if it's not perfect.
Totally. And I think there is this delicate balance when you're in any business that is a marketing forward business of what does brand mean and what are you compromising on brand versus what business decisions are you making because you're actually small enough to make those decisions that they're not going to have a material impact on brand. And I look back at Unilever and in a very positive way, if you work on the Dove brand, there are so many beautiful, wonderful guidelines that have created that brand that it is, which means it's really hard to operate out of those confines. Going back to the adaptability thing, yes, the sizes was one of them, but it was also people were giving us feedback that the products were not easily enough, they couldn't distinguish between the products, and we were like, oh, interesting. So we then created artwork and labels and different packaging that sort of adjusted that. And when we first started out, we had done that really intentionally. We had said we didn't want to put our own spin on what the brand was. We wanted to be really up to interpretation. We wanted it to be a blank canvas. A lot of Jackson Pollock, if you think about his art, we were really inspired by this idea of he didn't give his paintings names, he gave them numbers because he didn't want to force a feel on people. That was very much our mindset. And then the customers were like, no, we really want a story. We really want some background here. And so we then moved our fragrances from just being numbers to having names to then having artwork that would help distinguish them. And there were so many really proper, valuable pieces of feedback that we got. But if we had said, no, we started this with the ethos of being, it's just going to be this blank canvas, we never would have gotten, I think personally, some of the growth that we got.
Totally. I know I've been on websites before where I end up just closing the browser because I'm comparing apples to apples. And at some point you get decision fatigue and you're like, I don't even know what I'm picking between
absolutely.
anymore.
I have like 5 things in my basket. They look exactly the same. And
Right.
like, I'm sure we had that as an experience. And so we made the decision to say, we're going to embrace that and we're going to take the operational challenges that presented and we'll figure it out. And we're okay because we still think this is on brand for what we stand for, which is a wonderful, beautiful, personalized fragrance experience that is all about confidence.
So you mentioned to me when you were finishing up at Unilever, you already had one son, I believe. One kid.
Two if
one
you
kid,
believe
and then
it.
you were having your your second. So young kids at home while you're building this. Talk to me about that experience.
Hard. And I would say that, you know, my biggest regret, both historically and now, is how much time I spent on my phone. Because as an entrepreneur, you are often being called into, like even today, I'm down a customer service person, so I answer all of our customer service emails. I am doing a lot of different things, and so what I don't want them to think about is how much mommy was on her phone. What, you know, my eldest son, I think it was May 15th or whatever, the day this year was Mother's Day, and he walked into my room and he said, I made you a card. And he said, the front of the card said, Mommy, I love you and your perfume and your purses. Because he knows that I was running a perfume business and now I run a purse business. And so it's all part of me. And they wear perfume every day. They came into our office and were trying on the bags and they were like, I love this bag, Mom. Can I rent it? And I said, like, first of all, you do not have the credit for that. But like they're very involved. And so while they don't necessarily understand the concept of entrepreneur or CEO or any of those things, I love that they know that that's a part of my identity. And the thing that I will constantly be trying to strike the balance with is how much they watch me operate my business versus how much time and attention I pay to them. And so I think every mom entrepreneur would probably share, and frankly any like person who's working who has kids, you are trying to strike that balance. I think it's especially prevalent when the business responsibility lies with you and a lot of, you know, the main, you know, communication lies with you. But it's something myself and frankly my husband are both actively working on, which is how do they feel like they got the right amount of time with us and they don't feel like we were tied to our devices, our phones, our meetings, or whatever else. So I do almost every drop off in the morning. We have a wonderful woman who helps us after school, and she's been so wonderful and nurturing to our kids. But this idea of like, how do you turn off and give your children the right amount of attention? I think that's going to be it's going to be something we're all going to be dealing with, because I think about, you know, 30 years ago when I was young, which is going to now betray my age, but, you know, there wasn't Blackberries, there wasn't smartphones. And if you were being called away for something, you were actually probably on the phone. You weren't sitting trying to play while being on your phone, which is actually a really different experience. And so I think about how do I maybe step away and not have them watch that experience versus what we're all trying to do now, which is multitasking.
Yeah, and I think we see it even more with remote and hybrid workforces of
absolutely
you close the computer and now you're on mom mode. And before there was maybe a drive home where you're processing, maybe you're making some quick calls that you need to on the way home.
Absolutely.
You have to switch gears faster than ever now.
Well, and I can recall someone told me in COVID, especially the beginning of COVID when I was on mat leave, that they didn't have time to take a bathroom break. And I was like, well, you're working from home. How do you possibly not have that time? And it's because I think in COVID, this expectation of you weren't going anywhere. So if you weren't answering something, where could you possibly be? Right. It started to permeate in everybody's view of what their personal life should look like. And so I think we're all really still trying to redefine what that means in this like post-COVID age.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting when we hear a lot of business owners or different stories of success. It's often people who were able to model off their parents' behavior. So I think we have so much care around making sure that our kids aren't seeing people on the phone all the time. But yes. I think there's still the flip where, you know, I had a client and she had her daughter home for the day and she's like, oh, it just bothers me when I have to take a call and she's playing and she thinks I'm unengaged. And her daughter ended up saying something about the call with the man who had like such nice things to say about mom. And it made her really realize she was listening, but it actually was having such a positive impact in that her very young daughter thinks she's really good at her job.
which is so positive. I was
Yeah.
going to say, like, my children have always known the people that I've worked with because I try to bring, I have very, for better or worse, I don't create a lot of separation between my personal and my professional life because I think they bleed into each other. So my children know the people that I work with. They've met them. We talk about them. I'm happy to have my kids on a call if they need to be. That's how I operate. It does not mean that that's how everyone should operate, but it's important to me.
I love that. Okay, so you have Noteworthy happening.
Yeah.
And then at some point, we transitioned to being the CEO of another company.
Yeah.
Talk me through what happened here.
So can I first say what Zero Collective is?
Yes.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
So we are Canada's premier luxury handbag rental club where basically you can join. You can rent bags on a monthly basis. It's a wonderful way to complement your existing handbag collection, to try bags you would never actually buy. We have a lot of hard to find, hard to source vintage and designer items. And so it's really just a great way to continue to express your personal style. And so I joined the company about 9 months ago, 9 months last Monday. And I love it. And the part of the reason I made the decision to move from running Noteworthy and the marketing side to really taking sort of the CEO seat at Zero Collective was I loved everything that Zero stood for. I loved the business model, which is incredibly smart. I loved the people that support us through the Civil Ventures Network. I love the limited partners who I have as this like incredible, universe of advice. And I had started to realize that in my time at Noteworthy, my growth was just sort of starting to stagnate. And I go back to like this, the revelation I gave to you earlier around I hadn't realized how much I wasn't learning until I left Unilever. It makes me hyper aware now of what my learning curve actually looks like. And so when I was approached and got to sort of go into this opportunity, I thought, well, this is a great business. It's growing. I love, the business model, the economics. The team was great. I loved the idea of building Canadian companies. I spent a lot of my career building in the US, which was very rewarding, but I really love the idea of building something in the country where I'm raising my kids, where I want to grow up, or not where I want to grow up, but where I did grow up. And
we're still growing up.
We're still growing up. We're still growing up. There's still a lot to do.
Yeah.
Where I want to live, where my husband's from, and then also like just the pure opportunity of it. And so it was a hard decision and also an easy decision because we as women don't always feel confident enough or get the opportunity to step into a CEO seat. And to me, that was a really, really big opportunity. I wanted to get the chance to sit in that larger decision-making chair. And what I will say is it does feel quite different than being in a CMO, which is what I was doing before a seat. It's a very different level of responsibility. It feels different. The scope is different. The things I spend my time on are different. And yet, going back to the learning piece, I have learned more in the last 9 months than I had learned probably in the last 2 years as I was working on a business that I was already familiar with. And I find that part incredibly rewarding. And now I feel like the challenge ahead of me is how do I take the learning I've already had and now after 9 months a little bit more comfort in the business that I'm running and really take that and figure out like what's the Rubik's Cube of making this the biggest it can be, which we really feel like there's so much growth potential here. And we saw that when we started, I was only shipping to Toronto. In the last few months, we've expanded to all of Ontario. We have national ambitions. We have brand expansion ambitions. We have different digital product feature ambitions. And so to me, there's just so much growth to be had and the potential is so untapped that as we think about more of how we bring what we think is our secret sauce and then execute that at scale, that's really where the reward is.
I think this is so fascinating to hear because we're seeing really this movement of people chasing fulfillment more than just certain career titles or a certain dollar amount entering their bank account at their job. And I think a lot of people are craving this sense of fulfillment. And it sounds like it's been this through line for you of what's the work I want to do? What's the learning I want to continue to do? And I think people might often think that what we want to do is get really good at a craft and then stay in that expert master spot. And I think for a lot of us, we actually get there and go, well, now I'm bored and now I'm not challenging myself in new ways. I'm not learning and growing, which is a state that actually has brought out the best in me. So it's really cool to hear you acknowledge that of like, hey, I could keep running this $12 million business or I could keep learning and growing personally.
Totally. And I think like the one other thing that I would mention around titles, which I think especially is, sorry, I should say this is universal because my husband and I have talked about this. With the prevalence of how fast a social media platform like LinkedIn is growing, we all have title FOMO. Everyone's getting a better title than us, quicker than us.
Right.
And the reality is, at the end of the day, titles are moot. Meaning that as a CMO, oftentimes I felt like a CMO fraud. As a CEO, sometimes I feel like a CEO fraud. And so, like, thinking about what at the end of the day are you actually trying to accomplish, that's going to be so much more important than any title associated with it. Because titles come with, by the way, every title means something different. A CMO at a D2C company means something very different than the CMO at Unilever. Same thing with a CEO, where you're N of one and you're the founder versus a CEO at a company of 20 or 30 or 100 or, several thousand. They're all just, up for interpretation. And so I think like we all experience this a bit, like title FOMO, title fraud. And I would encourage anybody listening that is thinking about those things. It's what experiences do you want to get? What do you want to feel good about? Forget what you tell people you do, because at the end of the day, like you're only accountable to yourself. And so if you can end every day, every month, every year feeling really great about the work you've accomplished, great. Who cares what everyone else is doing?
I love that. Getting confident in the identity regardless, because otherwise it becomes this loop of you have title FOMO, you get the new title, and then you have title fraud.
You're like, oh my God, title, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's, I also think we don't talk about that enough, where, this idea of what are you actually stepping into in all these things, and how does that sort of build who you are as a person? And at the end of the day, to your point, where do you find fulfillment? Because if you're chasing title, if you're chasing status, you're never going to get there. Because that is not going to be the thing that's going to fulfill you.
So what do you feel like was most important to you in making that decision to step into a CEO role? We had wanting to continue learning. It sounds like you were really excited about the challenges you faced. What else felt like, okay, these are the things that make it a solid yes for me?
So I'll talk about first a bit, like the business model is just really, really sound, and I love everything we're doing, and I think there's just so much potential here. I think the other thing that I was thinking is, if I don't stretch myself into getting this true leadership experience, which I really wasn't sure going back to going to be the sparkliest girl in the world, she did not want to be a CEO. But in the beginning part of my career, I wasn't sure I wanted. I sort of, and I had this conversation with my business coach, I was like, well, if you don't do it, how are you going to know? How are you going to know if you want it or not? And like I said, I think, that sort of opportunity to say, I'm going to move into being the primary decision maker, which you typically are as a CEO. I have a board I'm accountable to. I'm not the only person who gets to make every decision, but I would also say my board is incredibly respectful and supportive, and they will basically say to me, for the most part, it's your decision. Here's my input, but it's your decision. That for me is a totally different skill set. And I would say, going back to even when I was the co-founder of someone, there are two of you, you're making decisions together. When you're the CMO or the CFO or you're the COO, you ultimately are deferring to someone else who's acting in a CEO or as a presidential position. And so I think that has been, or was the thing that I thought, I've never had that skill set before. How do I think about those things? And then all the things that go under it. So everybody, you are accountable for everybody on your team, for the things that you're building. And that feels really, really different than what I've been building before.
And it sounds like your business coach was a present figure through all of that.
Absolutely. She's amazing. I would recommend her to anybody. And if you want to comment, I'm happy to share her name. But she has been pivotal in sort of helping me understand, like, again, going back to the less about a title, less about a company, and more about what experiences do you want to have that are going to drive your own fulfillment, your own learning, and your own career growth.
I'm curious, with all these different types of jumps and spaces you've worked in, how do you think about risk when it comes to your career, which can be identity risk, and also the financial risk of making these different moves, jumping into something new, maybe deciding you don't like it? There's often financial implications behind these decisions too.
So I love that you asked that question, because if you'd asked me in 2021, so 5 years ago, I would have considered myself an extremely risk-averse person. I'd only ever worked for one company. I'd only ever done it in a way that was very, very secure. And I genuinely think being as naive as possible about risk is probably your best bet, because if you were to do every layer of scrutiny, you would never take any risk. I think the other thing I always thought about was, what's the worst that could happen? I could probably go back and worst comes worst, I could go back and work in CPG. Worst comes worst, could I be a Starbucks barista? Maybe not. Don't know. I don't know how good I am at making coffee, but there's always another way. And so I just sort of thought to myself, if this doesn't work out, I will figure something else out. And maybe it's not my perfect or my dream job, but that actually made, like, having that sort of awareness to say, I'm okay if this is not okay, or if this does not work out, because I will figure something else out and I will, build my way back up after that. That was really the thing that made me feel okay taking that risk.
Oh, I love that. I want to ask you 2 quick questions on Building Zero Collective before we finish out. What challenge are you most excited about solving in it right now?
Oh my goodness. So the thing that is really exciting is I'm incredibly, my business growth is limited by how many handbags I can bring on. So we are so excited to continue to build our handbag inventory, and we have a really incredible person who does all of my procurement. And every time a bag comes in, my general, response is, "Ooh, that's really nice." But it's really nice to be in a place where your capacity is only constrained, your demand is only constrained by your capacity. And so we are really working through that part of the model and thinking through, how do we build this beautiful handbag inventory? And then I think to myself, the world is so our oyster, meaning we've been operating as a small business, and as we scale, and we've seen other businesses do this globally, how do we learn what's working? How do we optimize and move really quickly to the point where, I was on a call an hour before I got here, just brainstorming ideas, and someone on my team said, "So what if we do this?" And I said, "Great. Can we get that deployed by Monday?" And so to me, it's the speed to market and the things we can do to move really quickly that is really going to unlock this. And we are just scratching the surface about this. I think our, awareness level is probably less than 5% of Canadians, if not below that. If we can move the needle up and create a really beautiful brand experience, create inventory people want, and then create something that feels really sticky. I always talk about the fact that I'm in a dopamine business. When your swap opens up every 30 days and you get something new without actually having to buy it because it's just your monthly subscription, that's an incredibly rewarding, pleasing feeling for anybody who's a member. And so how do I keep building in a world where there is a lot of bigger things going up? How can I be a positive dopamine trigger? I will take that.
I love that because I've been using it for maybe 2 or 3 months now. And I have to say I am not a luxury girly by default. I find a deal at Old Navy kind of situation.
By the way, so do I. When someone's like, what are you wearing on? I'm like, Zara, $20. That's my shtick.
I know. I'm trying to stop saying every time someone compliments, thanks, I got it for $7. I think it's just such an instinct.
We need to lead with the price. For whatever reason, I'm always willing to share what I spent on.
100%. And I have to say the swapping, it's so fun. When you say dopamine hit 100%, I'm like, ooh, this bag is so nice. And you feel the difference in the quality of a leather. And it's just been really fun to even think I have this event this month, which bag would be fun for that? And it feels like you're shopping your closet, but it's these things that, to your point, you don't have to purchase and own, but you go, oh, well, for this month, I'm going to be a Prada girl.
That's right. Or I'm going to be a Fendi girl. Or I think you also hit something else on the head that we have found with a lot of our clients is many of our members are actually they own designer handbags, and this is a great way for them to experiment with a different style, a different size. And so I always tell the story that when I was a member before I was leading the business, I had said to myself, when I get my next bonus or whatever else, I'm going to buy a Dior saddlebag. And I rented one from Zero. And I found it's absolutely the worst bag for me. It's a beautiful bag, but it's one that I'm so glad I didn't spend any money on and then learn that lesson the hard way.
Yeah.
And so whenever people are coming in and we're doing a showroom with them or we're doing something digitally, I ask is this for your everyday life? What do you carry? Are you comfortable if it doesn't fit your sunglasses? Are you comfortable if it doesn't fit your wallet?
Yeah.
Which many people, they're not carrying wallets these days, so it's not an issue. But I want this to be something that fits in and makes your coffee run feel as glamorous as your night out. And so the more we can help people figure out those things and then create a positive experience, the better off we are.
And I'm such an advocate for personal style. It's such a great way to feel like yourself or feel like that extra dose of confidence that you maybe need going into a situation. And I love that point of you get to try on different personalities. Like the Prada purse I'm thinking of, it's this white, you probably know the name better than me. It's white with a red interior and sits up.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
These cute little like icons on it. Never would consider purchasing something like that before. And now, even when I scroll through the Zero Collective website, I'm like, there's my purse. Like,
there it is.
It's like, that's mine, because I just like loved having it. I loved the way it sat on a table. I would have thought like, oh, this is kind of an odd shape for a purse. I absolutely loved it.
Right. And this is one thing that I think is really interesting, and like even we can do a better job of as we think about our business is what I hear and what we think about as one of our brand pillars is this idea of discovery, something I never would have chosen. And therefore you're choosing it because your overarching like out-of-pocket cost is not huge. You're not being asked to invest a ton. Yeah. You can experiment with it in a really safe way. If you don't love it, you can switch it up after 30 days. But if you do, like, you can keep that bag. We sell them. You can keep it longer. There are so many positive things there. And people, again, to your point, get to experiment with their personal style. It's part of their, the things you think about when you put on your armor going out the door. It's just an extension of what you choose to express to the world.
100%. Okay, my last question for you. We talked a little bit with Simple Ventures and their mission, but what does it mean to you to be building companies like this in Canada?
A lot. I say that because I think Canada is an incredible place to live and raise children and to be a great citizen of. I continue to be proud of who we are as a nation. And I think what's really interesting is I think sometimes Canadian businesses underestimate Canadians. And so when we go back to the potential piece, like I think there is something about, and this is what I love about all Simple Ventures companies, they exist to do better by Canadians. And so if I can do that in a very different way than the other portcos do, like Alma or Kindly or Harvest, I'm doing it differently, but I'm hoping to bring a little more joy, a little more light into other Canadians' lives where they might not get access to some of this. That can make me feel really, really good. And then you're continuing to grow the Canadian economy, the Canadian job market, all the things that I think we as Canadians really want to do.
Oh, I love that so much. What's the best way for people to find you or learn more about Zero Collective?
I'm so glad you asked. So our site is zerocollective.ca. You want to find us on Instagram. We're Join Zero Collective. And anytime you want to reach me or my team, you can always email us at concierge@zerocollective.ca. And we are super excited as we think about our big expansion over the next few years.
Yeah, and we're so excited for you too. Thanks for sharing all of your wisdom today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.